Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate you coming out to see this presentation today. And we are going to be talking about the importance of math in both STEM and non-STEM careers. And so we are actually going to start this presentation off with a poll. And I'm curious, just out of everybody here, how you would best describe your current career path or your current career. Would it be STEM or non-STEM? And just in case anybody is not aware of what STEM stands for, it is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Okay, so we look like we're about 50-50 split here.
Nice. Okay, great. So we're actually going to start off with a little bit of story. So some background on myself is I started with Mathnasium back in 2013 as an instructor. And so I've been with Mathnasium for a long time and have therefore had lots of conversations with lots of different students. And one of the reasons why this topic is important to me is that I've had lots of conversations about this with students. And when I first started, one of the most popular questions that I would get from students was, when am I going to use this? When am I going to use this trigonometry or this geometry skill that I'm using? Because they didn't want to do it and they didn't really see how it was going to apply to their future. And when I first started out as an instructor, I would try really hard to kind of find a specific way that it was going to be used. Maybe if they went into this job field, they do this or this. And then as I kind of grew across the years, my answer to that question changed a lot. When I kind of finally became a director, my answer to this question definitely came to, you might not use it. And so that's a really important answer to me, because what we're going to talk about is that math has a lot of just general uses in both STEM and non-STEM careers. And it's important that students understand what math is used in what places and just generally why math is important. And so we're going to get into the why for math, but now I want to do our second poll asking, for your jobs, how often do you feel like you use math in your day-to-day job responsibilities? And this can be any math. It doesn't have to be any specific type of math.
We have quite a few people saying frequently.
Okay, great. And that's kind of what I'd expect. You know, we're Mathnasium, and so of course we're going to talk about math, but why? So one of the reasons is that math, along with specific numerical and computational skills, teaches essential critical thinking and problem solving. So one of the most important aspects that you can have, or one of the most important and critical traits you can have when going into the career field, is the ability to critically think and problem solve. Employers look for that a lot, even more so than, sometimes even specific skills. But more so than that, and this applies to students in school right now, is that math skills have been linked to a broad array of cognitive aptitude skills. I have a little picture here that says this is your brain on math, and so you can kind of see some of the different areas that math affects. But just some ones that are particularly relevant for some students are selective attention, so the ability to focus on one specific thing and then direct that attention to other things, and working memory, and so the ability to remember certain sets of material, both for short periods of time and for long periods of time. But math has other effects on the brain as well, such as effects on the frontal cortex of the brain, so increasing the ability to make smart judgment calls and things like that. But then that kind of transitions us into why STEM careers. So we hear a lot about STEM careers, especially in school. We probably hear STEAM as well, to include the art aspect of that. STEM fields are among some of the fastest growing career fields in the world, and they are also among some of the highest paying careers in the world, which students are always interested in. And so some data that is a little dated, but is still relevant, is that in 2014, it was found that over 53% of STEM careers fell under the category of computer and mathematical occupations. So this is important. There are 4 primary fields that comprise STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math. And over half of those fell under the category of predominantly mathematically related. And all of these other fields, such as science and technology and engineering, are probably using math as well, but we can see that math has a large hold over these type of career fields. And then for non-STEM careers, so this is something I don't think gets enough attention when we talk about career paths. While STEM careers are fast growing, recent research actually has shown that the overall growth of STEM career fields is starting to slow down. And conversely, the growth rate of non-STEM career fields, and this can include anything like trade jobs, humanities jobs, such as leadership, development, training, anything like that, those are actually starting to take off in a direction that STEM careers were in the past in terms of growth. And so it's important to know that there are strong career paths for non-STEM oriented students. And so just as I said, that non-STEM careers are just as critical as STEM careers. And so leadership and development are an example of that. So where does the math come in here? One thing that we see a lot is there's a misconception about what role math plays in STEM and non-STEM careers. So we can, I think, pretty easily think when we think about something like maybe engineering or technology, we can usually see how math falls into that. A lot of the calculations we're doing and things like that. But what about in non-STEM careers, such as trade jobs, such as construction or maybe even graphic design? And so I've included some categories down here. And so it's not just about, is math involved? It's about how math is involved. An example is calculus and engineering versus geometry and graphic design. And understanding how math is used in these two different career paths can really help you as a parent interact with your kids and help them kind of develop their own interests in terms of careers, especially if they're a student that struggles in math currently. Some kind of tips to how we can encourage our students. First and foremost is encourage curiosity. I kind of like to think of this as do's and don'ts. So we do want to encourage and support, but we don't want to hover. Encourage them to be curious, encourage them to explore lots of different options. Help students understand their career paths and the skills involved, helping them understand what skills are involved and are going to be necessary for them to go into that career field, whether that's math or anything else. Another thing we can do is something called strength spotting. Strength spotting is a psychology term. Instead of identifying a specific career field, identify strengths that student has, that your child might have. So that might be anything like organization skills or creativity skills or anything like that. So identify the strengths of your student and really hone in on those. And if they're not aware of those, make sure that they are aware. And on the other end of the spectrum, identify problem areas early. We're Mathnasium, and so we help students with problems in their math education, but this can apply to anything. So identify if they're having struggles and know that if they're having struggles now, if nothing's done about it, it probably will persist into the future and is going to affect these types of conversations when you inevitably have them. And then last, and I think most importantly, is always stay positive. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, especially when we have older students who are in the high school range. They're starting to think about their careers, and maybe they don't really know. Maybe they haven't really identified what their strengths are. They haven't thought about what their future might look for them. Always stay positive, help them be positive, and that will go a long way. So I want to do some examples here real quick, and this can apply to any age that your child is, whether they are elementary aged or high school aged, looking at specific career paths and how math is used. And again, going back to how math is used differently. So this is just an example. So I have 5 careers: accountant, cardiovascular specialist, contractor, nutrition specialist, and a firefighter, and 5 types of math, if you will. And I've kind of just described them very briefly down below. I wanted you guys to see how different career fields are using different types of math, and how a lot of these types of careers are using math that you might not have thought of. So for a cardiovascular specialist, so a doctor, this probably makes a lot of sense. They're using algebra, they're solving for unknowns, they're using advanced operations. A lot of math goes into being a specialist in that area. But they're also using analysis and probability, something that is separate from some of the math that students do. So they have to know what the outcomes are of specific treatments or surgeries. They need to know how to be able to relay that to patients in a way that is understandable. A firefighter is one that students typically like to go to for careers that they're interested in. And so thinking about what they might be doing. So measurements, so taking measurements, multiplying, dividing measurements for any sort of project or thing that they're doing. And it's not listed here. You could argue that all of these jobs use numbers and operations, basic computation skills such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Just kind of an example of how you can talk to your students and show them how you don't need to think that because you want to be a firefighter, you can't because you are not good at math. You can talk to them about the specific skills that they need to be proficient in, or at least generate some ideas about things that they can work on in order to achieve that goal. And then some other helpful tips. Don't underestimate the power of a career fair. So I operate in the Chesterfield area of Virginia, and I know that all of our schools provide every year a career fair for children to come to where they can meet specialists in the area. There's always activities for those students to do to ask them questions to make sure that they get something meaningful out of that. And I know that schools are planning to do these virtually this year. A lot of other organizations are also trying to host virtual career fairs this year. So don't hesitate to kind of look those up and have your children attend. A lot of good can come from children asking the right questions to those in specific fields that they're interested in. And then seek out some other extracurricular opportunities for students to gain an early advantage on. So this can be anything, such if they're interested in coding, if they are into arts, if they're interested in things like graphical design, there's lots of camps or things that go to those skill sets. And so anything like that would be good to just expose students to different types of things that they might be interested to do in the future. So I wanted to take a few minutes to practice what we had kind of talked about before. So this will require some audience participation. So I've listed a few careers that I think are kind of on the standard, this is what I want to be when I grow up list for students. We have an astronaut, we have a pilot, police officer, doctor, veterinarian, we have business owner. And so I want to see, what kind of math do you think these individuals do in their career fields?
Okay, so one answer that I see so far is like is a good one is don't astronauts have to do a little bit of everything?
Very much so. I know we just had the recent SpaceX launch, and we were just talking about among our Mathasium group about all of the math that was probably required to make that happen successfully. That's a good one.
So someone suggested that a sports manager would probably use analysis and probability, measurement, numbers and operations, and geometry.
Yeah, definitely. The analysis and probability one is really good. Sports managers are always looking at averages and statistics for their players. There are students who can tell you for like baseball what a player's RBI is right off the top of their head. And there's a lot of math that goes into figuring things like that out.
So I see doctor and slash vet having analysis and probability, measurement, numbers and operations. And a question, someone says they're curious about what police officers would use.
That's a great one. And I thought about this a little bit too. And one thing that I think that they would use a lot is actually algebra. Because one of the key parts of algebra is learning how to solve for unknowns. So to look at a problem, kind of break the problem into its parts and identify an efficient way to solve that problem. And so algebra is as much a way of thinking as it is a type of math that involves specific skill sets. And so I think they would use that aspect, especially if they were doing any sort of like detective work or anything like that. But they probably use numbers and operations as well. I'd probably say analysis and probability for things like crime rates and things like that. And so I suppose it depends on kind of what you do as a police officer, but those are a few that I can think of. This is why career fairs are helpful, is that you might bring this list to a police officer and ask them, what kind of math do you feel like you do? What about pilot? What do you think pilots use?
I see probably everything.
Yeah, got to make sure the plane stays in the air, right? I know this is a little silly, but I hope that this kind of shows you how you can think about lots and lots of different types of career paths in different ways. And the point of this is so that when you have a conversation with your child about anything that they want to be, and whether they excel in math, whether they are kind of where they should be in math, or whether they struggle in math, you can help identify problem areas or areas of growth that they can have and help them continue to stay positive and encourage them on whatever track they want to be on. We don't want to close any doors for students in the future, and one part of that is making sure that we identify what we need to do to make sure that door stays open. So just to kind of sum it up, STEM and non-STEM careers, both are important for different reasons. And so depending on what your students' interests are, there are a lot of ways to encourage them to think about how math is useful there. Math orients our brain in a way that is unique in itself, allows us to be better problem solvers, critical thinkers, and just generally gives us the skills that we need to perform well in any job. Does anybody have any questions?
We do have one question starting off. Question is, how would you recommend we identify our students' strengths and weaknesses?
The first thing that I would do is I would ask them questions if this is specifically pertaining to math. So I would pay attention to what they bring home. A lot of times, if you don't have math worksheets at home, then just staying Stay engaged with your teachers, especially when school starts. Be involved in asking the teachers, what does it seem like my student is struggling with? I would also, and this is not to kind of plug Mathnasium in, but we do also offer a free assessment that we could very accurately tell you what is specifically pertaining to math, your students' strengths and weaknesses are. So that would be a good way to identify those. But just generally talk to those that see your child on a day-to-day basis. And if your child is young, ask them math questions out loud. So if your child is in elementary school age, ask them simple computation questions like 6 plus 9, 5 plus 3, and pay attention to how quickly they solve those problems, and ask them how they know those problems so that you can get a sense of how they're thinking.